process of the elections. So let me now bring in part of my panel. They've joined us now live in studio. Dismas Kizito Mokua, seated right next to me. He is a political communications advisor. Thank you so much and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And we have, at the far end, we have Tom Maliti, who is a World Affairs Analyst. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. And Happy New Year to you too.
Happy New Year to you too.
So we've come from so far, and 2017 is basically an election year. That is what makes sense for Kenya right now. But with Gathara, we've been talking about this whole process and how difficult this road seems to be. From your point of view, with everything that is happening, where are we? How can you rate our preparedness, if there is any preparedness, so to speak?
The biggest tragedy in Kenya is the political elite have made us believe that elections is so complicated science that it's not something which can be done in a day. And I really wonder why they do this. It's probably because they want to scare us into a particular space so that we become nervous as a nation. Waking up early in the morning at 4 o'clock and casting your ballot should not be a complicated science. But because the political elites have got hidden agendas, a lot of mischief, they want to make it so complicated so that Wanjiku's vote doesn't matter. In an ideal situation, IBC and all other stakeholders should ensure that we have a credible process, that we have credible systems, that everybody, if you're a voter in Mandera and you go cast your ballot, you know that your vote counts. And when you look at the Constitution, for you to be declared president, you're supposed to have 50% plus one. So majority of us do not appreciate that the plus one is for every voter in Kenya. But our players, both in Jubilee and in CORD, they want to make this thing appear mysterious, so complicated, so that they're able to steal.
And complicated? Is that where the manual backup, this whole systems, we're talking about networks and everything, is coming in?
Yeah, and no, really, there's nobody in Kenya who wants to have a credible election. Jubilee claim that they want Kenya to have a credible election, and CORD claims they want Kenya to have a credible election. But actually what all of them are interested in is manipulating the system to serve their interest. If Jubilee is able to manipulate the system so that you have, and they stand accused even by the Supreme Court, that you have about 1.2 million dead voters casting ballots in their favor, they'll be so happy. If CORD gets the opportunity to do the same, they'll be very happy. And you remember Kriegler said, during the last election, 2007, nobody would actually tell who the winner was because there was massive rigging in all parts of Kenya. A basic study of demographics reveals that there's no way you can have 100% voter turnout unless you are in a dictatorship, say like Rwanda, where you are forced to go and cast your ballot, or unless by law you are required to go and vote. So really, it's Kenya, we are held hostage by the political elites who make it so complicated because they're looking for the opportunities to steal. Because if the electoral process was free and fair, and Justice Mutunga has indicated this, up to 90% of people who hold elective positions will not be in office. Will not be in office. Tom, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this one. Is it that complicated of a process?
It shouldn't be. Counting is 1 + 1 is equal to 2.
As simple as that.
Yeah. It's not complicated.
Yeah.
But I think what complicates it is we're talking about people who would like to get into power or remain in power, for that matter. And we have not reached a point as a country, particularly among the political elite, where it is understood that there are systems in place, allow those systems to work. If there are things that need to be corrected, correct them in an atmosphere of trust and sobriety, not an atmosphere of tension and brinkmanship. And that speaks more to political culture as opposed to whether an election can actually run smoothly and have no problems.
All right.
I mean, we have the example of Ghana.
Yeah.
The last 2-3 elections in Ghana have been closely contested. The difference between the winner has not been significant. Between the winner and the loser has not been significant. But Ghana has not gone through the kind of tensions that we have gone through.
Okay, let's talk about the specifics, and we start with the commission itself. We're having a conversation with Gathara about the composition of this commission. Already there are issues with the people who have been fronted to head it. Probably we'll have people going to court, when everything settles down, to challenge these names. Looking at the timelines, are you worried? Patrick, let's start with you.
Well, as I said in the first segment, that yes, I am worried about the timelines. I'm worried that we are not, we don't seem to be taking them seriously. As I said, Section 44 of the Elections Act already mandates that they should have in place. And it's not just procurement. It says it should be installed in place, the electronic system, by December. Now, we've already missed that. Nobody's talking about it. It's not being raised. It's not part of the amendments that we are discussing. Yet, I mean, if we were to run an election today on the basis of that, I mean, somebody could go to court and get it thrown out. I think that on a wider scale, I think Tom is right when he speaks about trust being the foremost deficit that we have. But trust is not created by simply asking people to trust the system. The reason why we put in all these mechanisms, to secure the vote, to secure the count, to talk even about how we transmit results from the polling stations where the actual counting happens, the tallying stations, is because this system has been abused. It's got to then earn trust again.
But do we have time to trust?
Now, this is the problem, is the mechanisms we put in to ensure that trust, number one, failed in 2013. And throughout that period, between 2013 and now, we've done nothing, about resolving them, about securing them, about auditing those electoral processes and saying, where were the failures and how do we change that? How do we fix that? It's all left to this sort of brinkmanship at the last minute, where everybody's trying to push in something that's going to favor him. That's why I said at the beginning, our politicians aren't interested in a credible election. They're interested in winning. In winning the election. And how that comes about, they don't seem to really care. So I am worried about the timelines we have, about the reduced time we have. Yesterday, the president...
You trust the outcome of the election. All the systems and procedures must be credible, and they must be in the public domain. That every voter in Kenya must know that what happens right from issuing ID cards. That anybody who needs an ID in Kenya today is able to access the ID. Anybody who needs to register as a voter is able to register. And then when you get to the polling station, we should be told the processes, how they work. They break it down in a very easy manner, A to Z. That when you go cast your ballot, this is how we are going to count the votes. This is how we are going to make the announcements and everything. So that if, say, Uhuru Kenyatta loses, people from Jubilee do not say that Raila has rigged the election. And if somebody from CORD wins, Musalia Mudavadi, Wetangula, Raila, then nobody really creates any mischief. Yeah, nobody casts aspersion. But right now, because it's being done in the dark, and it's so complicated, Maliti has said, I mean, what is the big issue? 1 + 1. If you want to send money on M-Pesa today, you'll do it to any part of the world, and there's no difficulty at all. And IBC has got a big responsibility, because any good amendment being proposed by CORD today, nobody's going to trust it. Any good amendment being proposed by Jubilee, nobody will trust it, because the levels of mistrust between the leadership of those two political formations is extremely high, which is IBC needs to come up, and in a very transparent manner. And they've been given a lot of resources. And the outgoing commissioners, one wonders, what have they been doing in the office for the last 5 years? Because if they're claiming they're not ready for an election, that we don't have the systems in place, is the election we're going to have this year something which has come from the blues? Is it an emergency? We've known all along that every 5 years there's going to be an election. And
but I mean, the commission was thrown into limbo. They've been harassed, right, I think, from 2013.
No. That's the propaganda they are spreading. Because a successful leader in any organization, even somebody who sells airtime across the road, if he goes to the village for a funeral, there should be somebody to come in and assist for him or her while he's away. And we expected the commissioners who earn a fortune, in excess of 1.5 million a month, to have created systems. Unfortunately, the impression created is that the system to preside over the elections in Kenya is those commissioners. I mean, all of us are human beings. If our system is going to be individuals, then I think we've lost it as a nation. Maybe we need to pack up and go to another country. They needed to have created solid elections, so that even if those commissioners, all of them, die a day to the election, the following day we still have our elections. Does it mean if for some reason they've gone for a benchmarking trip to Ghana or Nigeria, as they normally want to, and 3 weeks to the election, all of them perish, does it mean we're not going to have an election? I think these guys are just
very clear,
mischievous people.
Okay, so I'll want to hear Maliti's comment, but before then, let's just listen to what President Uhuru Kenyatta had to say about the election. And he emphasized that indeed the election is going to be on that day that was set, August 8th. Let's just listen to that.
Let me repeat, we will hold elections in August of 2017. The elections will be free, fair, and transparent. We expect all contestants to accept the results and play their role in building a Kenya of the future.
All right, President Uhuru Kenyatta, very emphatic that indeed the election is going to be free and fair. What do you make of that statement? Is it really genuine, given the issues that have been dogging this whole process?
I think the test for that statement will be what happens in the Senate this week, this coming week, because clearly in the National Assembly, the idea of talking to each other as opposed to talking across to each other or talking at each other does not exist. But in the Senate, both sides have reached some sort of accommodation and have understood that as much as I have a specific point of view and I may hold very dearly to it, I can express it civilly. I can allow you to also express your view without being offended by what you're saying. And then at some point, subject it to a vote and see where things go. So the test will be what happens in the Senate. Okay.
There has been a lot of concerns that there could be violence. We hope not, but even church leaders, you hear them talking about, we want a peaceful process. And I mean, looking at the events that have been taking place right from the tear gas Monday, we don't know if we'll have some more this year, and also even the chaos that were in the National Assembly. Do you feel that these elections will be peaceful, as every leader is saying right now?
Well, violence is not inevitable.
It's not inevitable.
It's not inevitable. It doesn't have to happen. Just as a rigged election is not inevitable, it doesn't need to happen. Even with the reduced timelines, if you look at our history, prior to 2002, in the 97 elections, etc., we always had this sort of brickmanship where we came together at the end and sort of crafted a series of what they call minimum reforms to the system. And I think that for me is a big problem, is we've always concentrated on the minimums. So there hasn't been a push throughout to actually audit the entire system of how elections are run, and then fix that, and after every election to go back, look where were the failures and how do we sort that out. Now that said, we are where we are now. If you read the working reports after the elections, there were two facets to the violence that happened. There was a supposedly spontaneous protest about the results, but there was also organized violence, and this wasn't unanticipated. The NIS had warned before that people were organizing, being armed, to perpetuate violence. So I think we have a twofold question. Is first, how do we secure the election so that you don't end up with a significant number of people thinking that they have been disenfranchised? And then secondly, what is the state doing to actually ensure that politicians, who are the people who mobilize, who arm militias, etc., are not doing that, are not going to do that? So we need to see punishments. And the fact that we never punished anybody for 2007 violence is a big mark against us. It means that lots of people think they can simply get away with it for as long as their person wins or their guy. So I think we need to be much more, as citizens, we need to have our eye on the ball here and to insist that the government needs to work, and it has to be seen to work to reduce the opportunities for politicians to foster violence.
All right. So before Dismas, you make your comment, we'd like to hear what President Uhuru Kenyatta had to say about, the elections and violence. He actually called for peace in these elections very emphatically. Let's listen to that.
I want to say to all Kenyans, we will not allow our efforts and those of millions of Kenyans to be destroyed by politicians who seem to have embraced the lesson that confrontation and provocation are the only way for them to operate politically. They have announced demonstrations and even the so-called mass action in the coming days. Let us be honest with one another. when assessing what they mean by mass action. In the past, when politicians have used this phrase, they have meant violence is on the way. I tell our young people, do not allow yourselves to be used so badly.
All right, Dismas, are you worried by anything that or concerned by anything that the president has just talked about there?
I'm not worried at all. And maybe let me use an example.
Concerned?
Even that's I'm not concerned at all. Let me use an example. We are told that the richest man in the world is Bill Gates. And when he set out to come up with his company, he did not say that I want to be the richest man in the world. He said, I'm going to come up with a solution. And in the process, people have bought his solution and he's become the richest man in the world. He's made money in truckloads that he can even finance our election till nobody realizes. And as a result, if you don't want to have violence in Kenya, have a credible election. Anybody calling for a peaceful election in Kenya is actually preparing the nation for disaster. Because Kenya does not need a peaceful election. Kenya needs a credible election. And a peaceful election is the byproduct of a credible election. Because Kenyans are, on average, are rational human beings. If you participate in an election and you lose, and every Kenyan knows that you've actually lost. If there's a context between Gathara and Maliti, and we know Maliti has lost the election, which was free and fair. So even if Maliti has got truckloads in resources, he tells us, let's go to the streets and fight. We'll tell him, no, we are not going to do this because you participated in a process which was free and fair. And for me, I think for anybody in Kenya who wants peace after the election, just ensure that there's going to be a credible election. That if you lose, you go back home, you cry, you shed your tears, and then you accept and move on. Like, for instance, the same thing has happened in the US. 50% of the nation, actually more than 50% of the nation, probably 51% of the people who cast their ballots were so disappointed with the Trump win because they said, this man, we don't know where he's coming from, is unpredictable. But because the election was free and fair, they went to the streets, did a bit of demonstrations. There was no looting, there was no destruction of lives and properties. And people went home. Right now, they've accepted and they are moving on. All right.
Maliti, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. He's talking about an ideal situation where you have a credible election and there's no violence and everybody moves on. But looking at our past elections, is that even possible? Because, Kenyans, it's always been like mtuetu, we die with our person. If he doesn't win, it is a problem. So is it really about a credible election? Or is it just who we are, we want our person to win?
Does anybody doubt that the 2002 elections were credible?
Right.
And, that was a good example.
And the Electoral Commission at that time had less money than the current Independent Electoral Commission has. They had many more commissioners, therefore many more political interests at stake within the commission than the current commissioners. And some of the things that Gathara has talked about, there has been an audit done about the electoral system and so on. So there are things that were done to fix that, which are included in the current constitution. Now, the thing that remains is not the laws. Yes, there are things that you may need to improve on and so on, but overall, what needs to happen is for people to accept that they have a public responsibility. One of the problems with the last election is the commissioner said, we're in charge of policy, the secretariat is in charge of implementing. So if there are any problems in terms of who counted what and who didn't count what and who, transmission and, whether things were transmitted or not, that's the secretariat's responsibility. Now, a responsible commission would have said, we acknowledge our mistakes, we are going to look into those mistakes, and then at some point come out with their review of what happened. And this is part of the problem of our elections now, the situation we're in now. The problem is we know that something went wrong in 2013. We don't want that to be repeated. But the Electoral Commission has not come out publicly to say, these are the things we identified as mistakes. These are the things that have been solved by the political settlement that was reached in November, October. And these are the things that are remaining. But we as a commission, we are committed that even if we don't get 100% of everything that we need in order to ensure a perfect election, we are going to do our best. And we're going to consistently communicate with the Kenyan public so that they know, because this is one of the ways that you can build a credible election.
Right.
By consistently letting the public know what you have done, what remains to be done, and why what remains to be done has not been done.
All right.
Because some of the things that fuel the concerns and the conspiracies is people don't know. And therefore, they fill in the blanks with whatever suits them.
Information that they have.
I think, if I may quickly just come back on that. Two things. First, when it comes to the system that we have currently, I mean, as you noted, in 2013, it was shown to be deficient, and hasn't been fixed. I'll give you two examples. First is the timeline for resolving a petition at the Supreme Court still remains at 14 days. Yet we remember in 2013 when Odinga put in his petition, initially the IEBC, who he was suing, refused to give him documents. That's what ate into his time. We haven't changed the law to compel the IEBC to give whoever requires it these documents. So we are still in the same situation. If it's disputed again in 2017, that the IBC can say, well, sorry, you're not giving your documents, go to court, which eats into your 14 days, which we have not expanded.
Right.
You see, but then the IBC is an impartial arbiter.
Well, actually,
therefore, the law is not a question of law. The IBC should accept we're impartial. When a petition is filed, we give the information.
The IBC won't do that until, what my point is, the IBC should not have the choice of we will or we won't.
Yes.
Put it in law, compel them to give it to you the same way they were compelled by the courts to give in those documents. We should compel them beforehand in the law, to do it.
Okay.
The second thing is, if you look at registration, the audit that you spoke about that the IEBC did after the 2013 election, only pieces of it were leaked out. Nobody really knows the whole thing. But one of the things that came out was IBC itself admits it didn't know how many people it registered. That should really, really worry us. That is the register we have. That is the register when the Okoa Kenya were doing the referendum. That's the register they were using, where we don't know how many people we have registered. That should really worry us.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is, if we want to have a credible election in 8 months, let's actually be honest about where the gaps are.
Right.
Let's actually sit down, audit it, even if we're going to have a minimal audit, because we don't have time to do a comprehensive one. Let's do that and fix what we know to be problems, and not be sort of captured by this rhetoric between politicians. One of the worst things we ever did was in November, was to leave this to the politicians to solve.
To decide.
We repeated the mistake we did with IPPG in 1997. which set us up for the failure of 2007. And we're repeating that. We're not learning from our history. It shouldn't just be politicians sitting down and saying, give us your views and we will decide.
All right.
No, I think that's a model that's failed us many times and we shouldn't repeat it.
Let's talk about the president taking a swipe at the opposition. What is your view about what he said? He said, they have done this. The youth must be very cautious because these people, do not have the best interests of the youth. What do you make of that statement in that address at this time?
Well, you can look at it from two perspectives. Number one, President Kenyatta is speaking as a head of state and a head of government. So he's supposed to reassure the nation that everything is okay. But the speech he gave last night, it was more of a jubilee statement, that he spoke in his capacity, not as the head of state or head of government, but as a presidential candidate, which is very worrying, that he's the person to reassure the nation that the elections are going to be free and fair, and the elections are going to be held in August. It must not be his space to give us those guarantees that the elections are going to be held in August, because I understand that's part of the constitution that we have in Kenya today. And unfortunately, Kenya has been taken hostage by lawyers who come up with these funny pieces of legislation, then a day later you have to review. The committee which came up with the proposed amendments last year, still confused, I don't know whether it's this year, last year, led by Kizito Murungi and James Orengo, we are told those are some of the best brains you can ever have in this part of the world. Understand, Kizito Murungi went, I don't know, to Yale or Harvard. So he's really a top-of-the-range brain. But now you wonder, when they were coming up with those pieces of legislation and amendments, did they not realize that we needed a manual backup? Kizito Murungi represented Jubilee. At that stage, didn't Jubilee realize that we needed to have those kind of amendments? So they wait when the train has left the station, then again they start shouting.
They're going to panic.
Yeah, putting the entire nation into panic for no reason. So for me, I think the president needs to be reminded that picketing, do demonstrations, they're anchored in the Constitution. And if anybody wants to do demonstrations, they can knock themselves dead because they're allowed. If somebody has got an issue over IBC, let them go do their demonstrations. And if somebody distracts property or lives, then the law comes in. In Kenya, we have a very solid constitution, but we do not respect the rule of law and order. There's no consequence if you engage in mischief. If you're a politician, you go and shout that somebody's a thief, you steal somebody's cow, nothing happens. If there was consequence for any mischief today, then would be in a very good place. Okay,
so we want to listen to that bite where President Uhuru Kenyatta is talking or addressing the opposition. Let's just listen to that.
We must also be honest in assessing some of their actions since the last election. They have refused to accept in good faith the results of the last election. They have kept up a hue and cry that they were the victims of rigging, despite no credible election observer agreeing. They have threatened to make Kenya ungovernable. They have shouted insults in rallies and held the presidency, which belongs to all Kenyans, in contempt. They have even in past threatened to march to the seat of government and overthrow the government of the people. This, fellow Kenyans, is not opposition politics. This is disruption and undermining of our country.
All right, harsh words there, Gathara. What is your take on that statement by the president in regards to?
I think it has been unfortunate. It's part of a trend I'd say we've seen with this particular administration, where they don't expect that they will be criticized or held to account, and they seem to take it almost personally, when it happens. Criticizing the president, and the presidency, I would say, and actually the system that put him in place, is the right of every Kenyan. If they don't like what they're saying, what's proposed for them, they have every right to go out and complain about it. That in itself, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's very healthy. I think the president makes the same mistake he's accusing the opposition of. He says, well, they've refused to accept the results. Yet he himself refused to accept that actually there were problems with that election that put him in place. And I think it would go a really long way in simply admitting there are issues. We are not looking to relitigate the election of 2013. We are looking at 2017 and we are saying, how can we avoid the very same problems that we had in 2013? The third thing for me is the sort of when it comes to things like the protests and things. Yes. The sort of painting of this as riots, as it's inherently bad to have a picket. Right. It's inherently bad for people to go out of the street. It's not. The president himself should be coming out and saying, well, actually, I will, just in as much as I protect the rights of all Kenyans, I will protect their rights to go out on the streets, and they have every right to do it, and we will support it. I liked when he said that he's going to go around and listen to people. Well, I wish he'd start listening now. When people complain about... Is it
too late to go around listening to people,
you don't have to wait till he does his countrywide tour. Start listening now. When people tell you there is a problem with the way you're passing laws, with this sort of ignoring the fact that people have legitimate concerns, there is. When your own CS stands up and says, we have enough tear gas in advance of a protest, almost criminalizing the idea of people going out on the streets. When, as we saw on Jamhuri Day, peaceful people taking a walk around Nairobi get tear gas. Why? Okay. This is his own CS. So if he wants to start listening, let him start listening now. Let him not promise us he's going to listen, in some few months to come. Yeah. Start listening to the concerns being expressed now. All right. And then rein in your own sort of brigades who are out there almost polarizing the country.
All right. Let me just hear Tom's comment on this one. Dismas said that in that address he was speaking as the leader of Jubilee and not the head of state. Did you feel the same sentiments?
Undoubtedly. I mean, there's no ifs or buts about it. And as much as he is within his rights as a citizen of the country to express his views in that way, there's a place and time for that. I think he was trying to give a New Year message to talk about the coming year and what to expect and how things will be managed.
Right.
And that should have a more national tone to it as opposed to a more partisan tone to it.
Okay. All right. So we want to just pause this discussion